Welcome to the Flychain Reaction, a podcast designed to empower healthcare providers like you to master the business side of running a practice. Each episode sparks a chain reaction where actionable insights on financial management, operational efficiency, and growth strategies build upon each other, creating a powerful ripple effect to help your organization thrive. With Flychain's financial expertise and insights from industry leaders, we'll dive into everything you need to ignite success. Join us and let the Flychain reaction spark growth in your healthcare business.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Flychain Reaction. We're excited about today's topic of conversation, which is really, how you think about like selling your business. What does that market look like? What does that process look like? And we always say, probably 3 years before you even want to maybe sell or entertain that notion, it's helpful to really start thinking through these things to help, prepare your business for that ultimate exit at some point in time. And there are different flavors of that, but we're going to get into a lot of things today, specifically as it relates to preparing, what things you need to look at. And really our goal here is to kind of connect the dots. This can be kind of a scary notion. There's this notion also of like scary, evil private equity coming in and rolling up independently owned businesses. And, we're excited to bring Justin from Cinnamon Hill Partners here today to kind of help us think through this, talk through this. And with that, Justin, thanks for joining us, and would love to learn a little bit more about yourself, Cinnamon Hill Partners, and we can then really jump into the thick of things.
Awesome, Ethan. Thank you. Great to be here. As Ethan mentioned, I'm the founder of Cinnamon Hill Partners, and we are a search fund, a topic that you might not know much about, but we will get into a lot as we talk about the different types of financial buyers out there. But we are a potential buyer, and I am a healthcare entrepreneur trying to acquire an existing excellent healthcare business and grow that business. Behind me, I have a group of investors, former entrepreneurs, healthcare investors who all they do is now invest in small businesses and help them grow. But backing up further, Ethan, and not just the basics of who I am, but I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest. Come from a family of small business owners. So my parents still go to work each and every day and are building a small business. I know the blood, sweat, and tears that go into that. And my older brother is a physician. He's going into the pain management space. And so I've always had an interesting background of family being entrepreneurs, older brother going down the medicine route. And so I've dedicated my career to kind of the intersection business and healthcare, trying to be a healthcare entrepreneur and buy and grow a practice, partner with doctors, really take on the business side of healthcare and let doctors do what they do best, which is care for their patients.
Thanks, Justin. I think like one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you on is like we kind of hit it off when we met for that same reason of, hey, like my family as well, a lot of like folks in healthcare, small business owners, but also that mission or even shared mission of wanting to help these folks, our customers, your potential, partner down the line, focus more time on delivering care, running kind of the clinical components of those business. For us, we take certain things off the plate from a technical standpoint and financial standpoint. And for you, certainly a lot of those business ops and things like that, I'm sure we'll focus on today. But appreciate setting the stage. And one of the things that we wanted to kick off here would be, it's a complicated buyer universe. There's a bunch of different flavors on who could buy your practice, whether that be like a large private equity firm, maybe a strategic buyer, a search fund like yourself. For our audience, maybe it would be helpful to kind of articulate what are the differences there, maybe some, pros and cons associated with each, knowing that there are different flavors of each of those. But maybe from your perspective, what is a private equity firm? How do they approach this versus a search fund versus maybe an organic, more strategic buyer of someone maybe in the space? Would love to just hear your perspective on that because it is a little convoluted.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe a good place to start here as we think about different types of buyers. Before we even talk about types, what's even more important for you as you are thinking about selling your practice or transitioning at some point in the future is make sure you align with the right strategic partner. That doesn't mean every time it's going to be a search fund like myself or a private equity fund or a strategic. really, this is a huge decision to sell your practice and sit down and think about what do you want for your future. So now let's talk about the different types to help you frame this and give you a framework to understand that a little bit better. Maybe we can start with strategics because that's an easy one. That is a local competitor, maybe a larger health system or hospital system that would come in and acquire your practice. There are a lot of pros and cons to this. Pro being the potential buyer here knows the business and knows the healthcare practice really quite well. It might be a smoother transition where they can absorb your practice well. Downside for this, maybe an obvious one being that you are just joining and lumping into a potentially much larger organization. So things like, okay, what about your current employees? What about the legacy of the business that you've built? What's the future of your practice? That's really going to be determined by the larger organization that you do join. So if it's a larger group that you really appreciate and you've gotten to know, and you know that they're going to take a great care of your employees and your legacy, then the strategic could be a great option. If it's a large hospital health system that has maybe a poor reputation in the local community for just acquiring and stripping out unneeded employees, that's maybe where you're not quite sure about if that is a great option for you. That's just strategic. Another type of buyer, let me just classify them as financial buyers, meaning that they come from the world of private equity or search funds. Now, I know private equity has a really bad name in the world of healthcare, to the point where physicians that I speak with tell me about, oh, I just read an article about how private equity did this or did that. And I'm not here to debate the clinical outcomes of some of these private equity backed purchases. I know the data in some cases shows that private equity backed purchases of practices do really poorly, and other data is more convoluted. I don't think we'll get into that nitty gritty today, Ethan, but just as far as yeah, I don't think you or I can really opine on the data. We've only read the articles that the other physicians and academics have written about. But what's important to keep in mind for a financial buyer like a private equity group is that they are certainly in the business of making money, and they will take control of your practice and more likely than not choose to either strip out unnecessary costs or try to grow as quickly as possible in order to sell to a larger private equity group down the line. So things like your current employees, the legacy of the business that you built, I think are seriously in question unless you can really get to know who the buyer is. Now, I also mentioned search funds. Cinnamon Hill Partners, the firm that I founded, is a search fund. A search fund is pretty unique in this space. It is a financial buyer from the aspect of we are a group of investors, but it's different than private equity because the search fund is me. Like Cinnamon Hill Partners, I founded. Cinnamon Hill Partners is just myself. It's the vehicle for myself to acquire a single practice. So I'm dedicating my career to just a single practice. And so the things I mentioned earlier, like how you really should get to know who is buying your business and the values that they have, what's the future for your business. That makes it a little bit easier with the search fund because if you and I align and our values align and the plan that I talk about for your practice aligns with what you hope for, and when I say things like, "Hey, I'm dedicating my entire career, I'm moving my family to the location of your practice, and I'm taking on the business side of healthcare and letting you and the physician team handle the clinical side." And if that aligns, then things like your legacy, things like your employees, things like who's going to be clinical oversight of the practice, then it would really align with the search fund. So obviously, I'm biased from a search fund perspective because I'm dedicating my career to this, but hope to be as objective as possible in outlining those three. And Ethan, we can dive into the more of the nitty gritty of those and share a visual if it's helpful. But that's the overview as far as the buyers.
I think that would be honestly really helpful because we just introduced this concept and different types of buyers, but kind of peeling the onion here, we do want to educate our customers as tactically as possible. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind kind of maybe sharing something and walking us through it, I'm a visual learner myself, so that would be helpful.
Let me share my screen here, Ethan.
Awesome.
And let me know. Good to go. Can you see everything all right?
Yeah, it came
Okay,
through
great.
perfectly.
So this is now we're getting into more of the weeds here, and happy to spend a little bit of time on each of these, but I'll also let the audience digest this visual a little bit. The three columns on the top are the different types of buyers that I mentioned. Strategics, you have your private equity or venture capital in the middle, and then you have your search funds on the right. On the left, each of these factors that you and your spouse need to sit down and think about when we're ready to sell our business and sell our practice. Um, what's our priorities? What are our priorities? It's a huge decision. The top one being, okay, company's future. What does that look like with the strategic? Well, you're going to be merged or integrated into the larger business. So again, if it's a larger business that you appreciate, you've gotten to know the folks at the larger business, then that could be a great option for you. Private equity, now you're going to be one of the many practices within a larger private equity portfolio. So a typical private equity fund, maybe they have 10 or 15 on the smaller end, a smaller private equity fund. A larger private equity fund, there might be 50, 60, 70 businesses that you would be one of those. And so you will certainly have the time and attention of a handful of folks at the private equity shop, but chances are you are just one of many. The search funds now, as I mentioned, I'm dedicating my career to this. You'll be the sole focus of the entrepreneurial buyer. There will be investors behind the scenes that help form the board, and they have larger portfolios, but you're getting the complete dedication of that search fund entrepreneur. The next
Very cool.
one is seller legacy. Competitors, strategic buyers, that legacy probably lost, potentially lost in the larger business. Again, you're being merged into a larger group. In the private equity world, that's a little uncertain. Again, you're one of many of their portfolio companies. Are you allowed to keep your legacy? Will it be preserved and appreciated? A little uncertain. From a search fund perspective, if you and I align and we want to keep your legacy in place and keep that into the next stage of the business, that will be preserved and appreciated. And then maybe last one I'll touch on, Ethan, and then we can talk about any of these as well. I just want to be mindful that I'm doing a lot of talking. I want to keep this conversational. It's just the seller's future. And so how do you want to be involved in the future? Certainly, if you are a physician owner and you are there in the day to day, still doing your clinical work, and from a business perspective, are driving some of the revenue, you got to really think about what does that future hold. And a competitor or strategic buyer, you're going to be typically compelled to stay for months or years for a very long period of time, or you might be pushed out to the point of, thanks, we got it. We got this going forward. So really think about those two. Similar from a private equity perspective, you might have to sign an agreement to stay for 3, 5 years or longer, or you might be forced to leave. From a search fund perspective, I think there's some flexibility there, depending on the type of search fund you're talking with. If you are a doctor that is driving the revenue in their day to day, we're absolutely going to want you to stay so we can partner with you. Or if you're ready to, hey, I want to transition in 3 years, great. That's part of the discussion with the group. But that's kind of I think that's the main points from finding the right buyer, this visual, Ethan. But is there anything else you wanted to double click on and spend more time on?
No, I mean, I think the one takeaway from my lens, and this is born out of just talking to all of our customers, is really like this seller's future legacy, of course, but that seller's future and what should they expect? And I think the takeaway is different buyers have different goals around keeping owners on, and there's some
Yeah.
flexibility here depending on that type of relationship. And it really is, once again, I always like to say, we'll get to this. It is a dating process, right? Like it's
Yeah.
none of these transitions ever happen. You have some timelines there, which I thought were pretty interesting. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not like getting a loan where you're going to go apply, you're going to get a yes or a no, and here it is. There's a qualitative element to all of these discussions, and I think business owners, when they go into these conversations, like should have in their back of their head, kind of for all of these variables, like what is their ideal kind of outcome here? Because one buyer might, that could be a deal breaker for them and it's a deal breaker for you. So dating and starting to really communicate around these specific things will help when that time does ultimately come to kind of put you in the best chance for success where everyone's happy. But the big takeaway for me is like, have an understanding of this stuff. And then when you're going and approaching these conversations, you'll be able to tease out relatively quickly who the right buyer is because they're meeting you where they are, where you are
Yeah.
rather. And on that same,
Totally agree.
yeah, Justin, like on the same front, you had some information and insight around like finding the right buyer and what practice owners should look for in that. And I always like to think there's sort of two lenses that are always coming to all of these discussions, right? It's the seller, their lens, who should they look for? And then also, what is the buyer looking for? And I think to give our customers who would ultimately want to be selling or taking, this investment, kind of giving the other side's perspective on this. I always find that to be really helpful. And maybe if you could kind of share, I know you put some other things together around what are the things that you as the buyer look like so we can tell our customers, because, part of this is packaging. Part of this is understanding what that buying universe needs to see to put yourself up in that sort of best chance for success.
Yeah, that's a great question, Ethan. If you don't mind, I'll just go back to our faces and then can share more.
Yeah.
I think understanding both sides here is really important because as a buyer, from the buyer's perspective, we look at companies to acquire all the time. And there are deals that come across and potential companies that come across every day, especially from a private equity perspective. Like your entire job is just to evaluate deals. Is this a good investment opportunity? So it's easy for us to think that companies exist in my spreadsheet or companies exist in a pretty PowerPoint presentation and forget that companies are built by real entrepreneurs that are there day in and day out and putting their careers on the line to grow a business. I think I have a perspective on this because my family, I've watched them do that most of my life. So that's the buyer's perspective, is they can think of this as a transaction, just a something that lives in a spreadsheet, like I mentioned. Whereas maybe on if I could opine on the other perspective is like, hey, you are in the weeds of your business day in and day out. And if you're a physician, like you're seeing patients every single day, you're worried about the headwinds as far as where is the industry going, but also like there's just a lot going on. And so how can those two perspectives come together? And it is that dating process, like you mentioned, Ethan. So from my perspective, I'm a buyer. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes of growing your business each and every day and being in the weeds. But I think what is really important in this dating process, and I might sound like a broken record here, but really get to understand the intentions of the person at the other side of the table. So from a buyer's perspective, I really want to understand, okay, why are you selling your business? Are you selling your business because you're ready to transition it to the next stage of your life? You're ready to retire in the next 3 to 5 years? Or are you selling your business because the business is about ready to blow up, right? Like, so you got to build that trust on some level. So I, as a buyer, I'm trying to really get to understand you as a seller. What are your reasons for selling? How have you built your business? Like, I'm really trying to put myself in your shoes. And I guess my advice for folks that are sellers is like, try to put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. So, what is their plan for my business post acquisition? Are they going to take care of my legacy? Or are they going to take care of my employees? What does the transition process look like? All of these are questions that you should be asking your buyer, and ask really specifically, what does the transition process look like? What is your plan for me post acquisition? I'm happy to work for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but what is your plan for me? Am I going to have clinical oversight? That's a huge question. Am I going to have clinical oversight of my business after the acquisition? What's the plan for my employees? And you can get deeper into this as the dating process gets further. It's like the legal aspects. Of course, you should bring your lawyer into that conversation. But before that, really get to understand and try to mind meld, build trust between your potential buyer and yourself. And we can dive further into that, Ethan, from like how is the buyer's perspective, but one to stop there is like that's really the thesis of it.
I love that, and would love to see some of the insights, but also just wanted to double click on one thing, and it's around like putting protections in place. So we kind of talked about, all right, I'm going to sell. We've been dating for a while. I I like you, Justin. I want you to join this journey and take over and institutionalize and grow. But I've got 25 employees and I want to make sure that they're taken care of. Like, what are
Yeah.
some of the maybe typical like legal elements of a transition plan that can get put in place to make sure everyone is happy? Like one example that you mentioned is, hey, you are going to have as the owner a salary for X amount of time. But what are some of the other things that you've seen in your career that would give owners more peace of mind? Is it, we're going to keep X
Yeah.
amount of employees on for this amount of time, or we're going to keep the name the same? Like, what are some of those leverage points or levers rather that, you as an owner can go into? Because at the end of the day, you do want to keep, some legacy, some imprint on that, whether that's yourself, your staff, making sure everyone's taken care of, I guess maybe is the simplest way to distill it.
Yep. Yep. That's a great question. And can we include like a legal disclaimer here? Like Justin and
Yeah.
Ethan are not lawyers. This is not
Yes.
legal advice. Talk to a qualified legal professional.
Right.
With all those disclaimers in place, I think let me speak as if I'm having a conversation with my lawyer and asking these questions from a buyer's perspective. I think some of the basics are that all sellers should keep in mind is first yourself. And if you are a physician seller, or you do some of the day to day from a clinical perspective, more likely than not, you are going to be encouraged to stay with the business for at least, I would want to say, 2 to 3 years. I have seen up to a 5 year employment agreement in place. And from your perspective as the seller, if you're okay to work for another 5 years, really make sure you get to the specifics of what that 3 to 4 to 5 year contract looks like, as far as what your compensation is, and how much clinical oversight you're going to have. I would encourage you to keep as much clinical oversight, of course, as possible, but also think from the buyer's perspective. If you are a main revenue driving force, they're going to want to make sure you continue to come to work every day. And frankly, when a lot of sellers get a big paycheck at the date of the sale, they're less enthusiastic about doing the day-to-day clinical work. So there might need to be some back and forth between you and the buyer on what that specifically looks like, as far as how you're compensated, and if you continue to come to work every day. But let's assume you're not a physician seller, and you're not necessarily doing the day-to-day clinical work. Then what might be more typical is, let me speak from a search fund. I don't necessarily know strategics or private equity, what they might have in place for you. They might encourage you to just retire right away, which is maybe something you prefer. But from a search fund perspective, dedicating my career to this, but I'm a young entrepreneur who has a lot to learn. And sure, I'm a high powered, highly motivated individual, but I've got a lot to learn about your business. So what's typical and what I'm asking of sellers that I'm talking with is, hey, can we have a 6 month to a 1 year transition period where maybe you step into executive advisor role, or we can play with the title, but you step into an advisor role where myself and you are running this business almost as partners for the next few months as I learn the business as a CEO. Maybe after 3 months, you don't necessarily need to be in the office every day. It's more of a part time. And then maybe after 6 months, you don't necessarily need to be in the office at all. And maybe you and I just check in every once in a while, because hopefully I'm a really quick learner and I really understand your business well after 6 months, and I can take over really fully at that time period. So that's what it would look like for you as the seller. That would also include a non-compete agreement as we get into maybe some of the legal discussions here, as far as like, for the next 5 years, you can't just launch a competing business across the street. That's typical in any transaction that you would probably have to sign something like that, no matter the buyer. As far as your employees now, let's transition from you to your employees. It's common to sign employment agreements with your top management team or your top employees. So if you've got 2 or 3 people that come to mind that are like, they are really crucial to the future of this business, then put yourself in the shoes of the buyer. I want those people to stay, and I want those people to be highly motivated. And at least from a search fund perspective, those key employees are going to be more crucial than ever to the future of your business, which is why we talk about your legacy excuse me, your legacy being honored, it's because I need your team. I'm not going to come in day one and just fire the most important people. Whereas a strategic or a private equity buyer, they might, clean house and start fresh with whatever their perspective is. From a search fund buyer, like I need those people.
Right.
And so what I'm going to do is, hey, can we have those folks, those key 2 to 3, 4 people sign 1-year employment agreements just to make sure we all stay in place? Maybe I'll give them a pay raise. Maybe if they're really crucial, we could talk about equity incentives to have them incentivized over the long term. But I want those 3 or 4 people to stay. Now, the rest of the organization, let's say you've got 20 employees, and you as the seller, you have some sort of agreement in place with the buyer. Your top 2 to 3 folks, management team, have agreements, 1-year agreements in place. What about the rest of the 15 of your employees? Well, again, if it's a strategic or a private equity buyer, if they're not necessarily needed for the day to day, like they're going to clean house. They're going to clean house. For a search fund buyer, when I come in on day one, I'm not gonna fire anybody as a result of the transaction. And I think what's really crucial is as I learn how to be CEO from you, as I learn how to be CEO, we're gonna first of all make sure everybody is on the bus, on the right, headed to the right place. But there's not going to be mass firings on day one or mass firings on month 3. But we need to evaluate what's the future of this business look like. So hopefully that can give you as much comfort as possible. I'm trying to not make a promise that no one's going to be fired or make a promise that everybody's going to be fired. Like we need to evaluate what the business looks like. But the important thing here to keep in mind is, again, what is the intentions of the buyer? If it's a competitor or private equity, like they're probably going to clean house. Like that's just historically what happens. Search fund buyer, like they need your team. They need your team more than ever.
That's, I think, well said. And that notion of it just depends on who the buyer is, right? Especially, I would even say some of the strategics similarly want to have sort of the right people in place to kind of absorb, keep business as usual going without that kind of top down, hey, we're going to optimize the financial health by like squeezing some people that we can put our own people in place, which is something that I would see happen more common on the kind of pure play private equity side. Yeah, Justin, I know you had like some cool kind of diagram. Once again, we try and be as like tactical and educational as possible. And I don't know if you wanted to share that other diagram you put together and kind of walk through it again, because once again, part of this is trying to get as much information into our customers' hands as possible. And so I know there's a lot going on here, but I personally find it's pretty distilled and also digestible. So maybe if you could walk through this from your lens, and how does a buyer, right, think about improving that business and evaluating that business when they go first to that table. So I thought this would be really, really beneficial.
Yep, absolutely. And I'll let the audience let them just wash all this information wash over them just for a second, because it is a lot. And I'll also ask the audience too to try to put yourself in the shoes of either you're ready to sell and you're talking to a buyer, or in the shoes of the buyer trying to buy a business and grow that business. That is what this slide is speaking to. And I actually used this slide in particular, I guess sharing a little bit of the secret sauce, but use this slide in particular when I'm talking with potential sellers about, hey, why should they sell to Cinnamon Hill? So this is what we would present to somebody when we're trying to acquire a business. And what this shows is our value creation plan. And this is something that, especially if you are rolling over equity into the business, let's say you keep 10, 15, 20, 30% of the equity in the business, you want to make sure that whoever is buying the business is going to do a great job at growing the business and increasing the value of your equity. And so that's what it really comes down to when you get to the finish line of, okay, what are the top 1 or 2 buyers? Maybe you really like both of them, but one of them has a really succinct and clear plan for how to grow your business, and the other is not so sure. Well, you're going to go with the guy or gal that's going to really increase the size of your equity, right? And so this slide is visualizing how to grow your business. So the 5 things on the left here, these are the 5 pillars of value creation. Each of these levers, as we can call them. I'm using some of the private equity style lingo, search fund style lingo here. But these are all levers to increase the value of your business. You can do things like pay down your own debt. You can do things like increase your margin, or in other words, cut costs. And you can do several strategies to increase the multiple, essentially increase the relative valuation of your business. Strategic acquisitions, you can acquire other practices or other similar businesses, or you can just straight up grow revenue, kind of a traditional way to grow your business. I'll say from a strategic buyer perspective, like a local hospital or a private equity buyer, I think one of the most common value creation levers is that margin expansion column, which is essentially cut costs. So when I said earlier, like they might just clean slate with your team, they're going to cut folks that don't need to be there, and they're going to cut costs as much as possible. Because if you keep the business exactly the same and cut the costs, the value of that business is going to go up, right? In theory, on a spreadsheet at least. From a search fund perspective, our thesis, and I'm speaking for all search funds, but really for Cinnamon Hill Partners at least, what we're really focused on is revenue growth and all of the levers included within revenue growth. And if it makes sense, not for every business, but typically that's why it says our focus is strategic acquisitions and acquiring smaller businesses that we can bring in to the larger business and grow in that capacity. From a revenue growth perspective, several ways to do that. And you said, Ethan, you like to be tactical. The audience is up the learning curve on that. So I don't mind being a little tactical here. There's several ways to grow revenue that depend on the type of business, but is almost universal across business language, which is essentially minimize customer churn. Nice way of saying take good care of your existing customers or patients, in this case, would probably be a better word. Expand wallet share. This is not true for all your customers, but essentially that's like creating more value for your customers, so they start spending more money on your products or services because you're adding more value to them. They're spending more money. Market penetration. This is a nice way of saying taking care of more customers in your existing markets, your existing services. So doing more of the same, essentially doing more of the same and reaching more customers by doing more of the same. Next one is market expansion. It's doing more of the same, but to a different market, or maybe it's an adjacent market. That could mean geographically, like maybe you are pretty geographically centered in the state of North Carolina, and you want to do more of the same and expand your services into South Carolina or into Virginia. That's an easy example of market expansion. Product expansion. This one would be not necessarily doing more of the same, would be launching a new product or a new service. This could be really adjacent to something you're already doing. Something that's near and dear to my heart, like in the pain management space, for example. I mentioned my brother is a pain management doctor. This would be maybe launching new ways to manage someone's pain and seeing what's on the cutting edge of the pain management space, and you launching into that type of product or service for your patients or customers. And the last one, and this is tricky in the healthcare space because pricing is really dependent on reimbursements in a lot of cases. If you do have a cash pay service, you can change prices. But I would say pricing optimization for a healthcare practice is negotiating better reimbursement rates. And oftentimes that is true at scale. If you have a larger group, you have multiple practices, you have a lot of data from multiple practices that you can come to the negotiating table with an insurance payer, that will give you that pricing optimization. So those are all the ways to increase your revenue. As a buyer, maybe just a full circle here, Ethan, this is how I am thinking about increasing the value of your business. As a seller, these are all things that you can be thinking about right now in order to position yourself to sell to a potential buyer and increase the value of your business that you're running today.
Yeah, I love that, Justin. And it's kind of interesting, like across our customer base, a lot of those value creation things are actually a lot of the things that we were trying to bring into our platform, like contract and rate analysis, what better way to improve the profitability? Same costs, you're getting compensated more for that revenue. Making sure you have a good pulse of what your referral sources are. Okay, great. Like, let's double down on what's working. So everything you're saying, I think there's a lot of value, and it's kind of this hybrid approach, right? We can use tech and data to uncover these things, but also it does often require human power to execute upon, those findings, if that makes sense. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about like the actual buying and selling process. One thing that you actually were chatting a little bit before we recorded this was around like deals get kind of close to the finish line. And unlike the last topic here, like what are some of the lessons learned from your experience, working with business owners today, looking to sell or entertaining the sale? What are things that like maybe some success stories? What went well in that process? But also for those that kind of get to the finish line, that what are the deal killers that you would see? Because that to us is, we don't want our customers maybe preparing for a sale in 1, 2, 3 years from time to do things and get right to that final moment, and all of a sudden the expectations have not been managed, and all of a sudden the things that they've been doing, they're not going to get that valuation because there was a skeleton in the closet or a stone that hadn't been unturned or overturned yet. Maybe like walk us through some like pros and cons of things, like what can a business owner do to help them have the highest chance of getting acquired or sell at the highest possible valuation, versus what are some things that kind of kill a deal?
Yeah. Well, Ethan, let me be transparent, which is if I have been super successful at this, I would be running my business right now and wouldn't have time to join this lovely webinar, because everything I'm doing is to acquire existing business and grow it. So I'll have a success story someday that I can maybe join a future episode and say, okay, this is the business that I acquired. This is how it happened.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I can opine on success stories that I'm really familiar with that the investor group has. And I can certainly share a lot of deals that I've had that have been close, almost made it to the finish line and fell apart for whatever reason, which is what I just mentioned to you when I joined,
Right.
excuse me, which is, just had a deal that didn't work out for whatever reason. But I would say maybe to frame this conversation is from the perspective of a seller, like how can you prepare for this? First of all, start early, start thinking about it now. So if you're viewing this, it probably means you're at least thinking about selling. You should think about at least a year, if you have the luxury of 2 years, 3 years beforehand to prepare for a sale. So think about it early is a good one. Next one I would say is surround yourself with really strong advisors who know how to sell businesses. So obviously Flychain, like Ethan, you can plug Flychain, but they're going to have your books and the financials in order to help you get ready for the sale. So when I, as a buyer, come in and request some financials, request some basic data, it's going to be ready and there for you, Ethan, to set you up for a future Flychain discussion there and hit your. But I would just say, last thing is surround yourself with advisors as well that know how to sell businesses, that include lawyers, and not just like your family lawyer or something. Like lawyers have specialties too. Specialize with a lawyer who really knows how to transact and prepare you for a business. They can speak the same language as my lawyer, who all they do is know how to help buy businesses. Not just a lawyer, but also I would say a strategic advisor if you'd like to work with a investment bank or a broker as well. A broker would be more of someone, I don't know, a car salesman who sells cars and they know how to sell cars very well. They know how to sell businesses very well. An investment banker, if you have a large enough business, an investment banker is more of a partner that would come alongside you and help. Certainly, they help transact businesses as well, but they would be more a partner in that process rather than like a car salesman. They would be someone who's with you throughout the whole process. I would say that's how you should prepare. So that's the frame of the conversation, Ethan. Let me tell you, no naming names, of course, but some deals that have died before we got to the finish line for whatever reasons. One deal that comes to mind specifically for me was it was the motivations of the seller. So in our initial conversation, the seller was saying, "Hey, I'm ready to move on to the next stage of my career. I've built this great business for the last 10 years. I'm ready to start a nonprofit foundation, and ready to move fully into my nonprofit. I'm ready to select the successor of my business. I want to give my business to someone who's going to take great care of it. So naturally, we got along very well because, hey, I'm dedicating my career to your business. I want to honor your legacy. I would love and be honored to be your chosen successor to take your business to the next level. But ultimately, the seller decided, I think I'm going to stay on board and bring on a group of investors that help me grow the business. But I'm going to keep running my business. So ultimately, that wasn't a fit for me as a search fund because I'm looking to come in and take over as CEO and dedicate my career to that. And this seller in particular wasn't really sure if they wanted to give their business to somebody else or if they just wanted to bring in some investors to help him grow the business. There's other deals that I've had where it didn't seem like there was a lot of trust being built, where some of the financial data that I was requesting or some of the data regarding the products and services of the business, it was coming back in a form that not all the details were being shared. The requests I had that are pretty basic requests about the financial history or the products and services seemed like not the full story was being told. And ultimately, if we can't build that trust, and it seems like from the buyer's perspective, the seller has something to hide, then I'm dedicating my career to this. I'm not going to dedicate my career to a business that I can't really trust. Can't really trust the seller or the financials of the business. And then there's other deals that end up not working out because of other things entirely, like industry tailwinds or healthcare space in particular. There's always some regulations coming out, or there's something to keep in mind. And if industry is changed in the healthcare space because of incoming regulations or whatnot, and then it's just not a great fit for us at the time. Of course, there's a lot of examples of the legal terms that you couldn't come to an agreement on, but that's hopefully not something that I'll have to deal with because I'm trying to build a great relationship with the seller. By the time we get to the negotiating table with our two lawyers talking, like the lawyers can figure it out. Like you and I, we're in agreement. Let's let the lawyers discuss the nitty-gritty details here and come to a fair transaction for the full value of your business. We don't want to pay too much. We want you to get paid the full value, and let's just come to terms on the agreement. That's why I have a lawyer. That's why you have a lawyer, so they can discuss that. But hopefully we've really built a lot of trust along the way already.
I love that, Justin. And almost to summarize, it feels like when you're thinking about this part of your journey, it's equal parts like qualitative and quantitative, right? You're talking about the diligence, looking at the numbers. Does this make sense in those spreadsheets, as you've kind of said a few times? But there are people behind those spreadsheets. And that's where that dating process, building that trust, having both sides, incentives aligned, carrying on legacy, treating employees, treating, the actual owners the right way. There's a lot to unpack here. And we always say it kind of takes a village, right? To build one of these things. And it certainly also takes a village to ultimately, transition in whatever, capacity that is, staying on, retiring outright. So, Justin, I really appreciate the time, man. I learned a lot here, and hopefully our customers did as well. We'll have those little documents and stuff available for our customers should they ever want. And we'll also follow up with our contact info. But thanks again, Justin, for joining and telling us a little bit about yourself, the type of company you're building. And once again, we like these because we share same mission here. And with that, I'll let you go, but appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Nathan. Love what you guys are doing. And you and I are really aligned in this journey together. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Well, take care, man, and have a great rest of your week.
Great. Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Flychain Reaction. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, feel free to contact us at info@flychain.us or schedule a demo through our website at www.flychain.us. See you next time!